Okay, I'm trying to figure out the best way to approach this record because I've never been a massive fan of Wobbler or Lars. You know, I appreciate and I understand where they're coming from, why people love them, but from all the records that I've heard up until this point, the most I can say is that they're a really great retro symphonic eclectic prog, but it's kind of all been done before. So I always keep my finger on the pulse, and I always want to, hope that maybe this one will be the one that surprises me. So maybe this is the one that does it. Gamle Mester by Lars Fredrik Frøislie, and I really hope I got that last name. I always kind of trip over these, foreign names, and these are always the fun ones. So Lars is the lead keyboardist and one of the founding members of the Norwegian progressive rock band of Wobbler, and they've put out some seminal records in the early 2000s and even lately. I really love their Rights at Dawn, From Silence to Somewhere, and Dwellers of the Deep. I can't necessarily say that I'm massive fans of those records, just because I felt like bands like this and bands like All Traps on Earth, they're basically just, I don't want to say ripping off, but definitely playing it close to form with bands that emanated from the 90s, like Engelgard. I feel like Engelgard in the mid-90s really came in with this unique, very progressive rock sound that hadn't really been captured. And I just feel like all these bands ever since have just been using that as the textbook for their homework. And they never really pushed the boundaries further, and they never really went outside the scope. They always just played very well within that sandbox. And I include Engelgard in that because their two other albums after Hybris, their first record, I just felt it was kind of like copy, paste, and repeat. With a band that stood apart from everybody else that made that so unique, whenever anybody's trying to copy that, I'm always just like, you're kind of missing the point, right? So when Lars went off on his own 2 years ago with Fire Foreteller, Tellinger, his last record, the one from 2023, it was fun. It was fine. I didn't really have too much to say. I felt like it was very much still in that vein, the eclectic, retro, progressive rock, having shades of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, King Crimson, and Genesis, like all the bands that I absolutely love, but not really doing all that new spins on it, Man, now we come to Gamble Meister? Yeah, Gamble Meister. And I think we have the first one that I can honestly say I have absolutely loved. I don't know what it is about this one, man. Like, I can't quite put my finger on it because all the elements that made me be like, meh, to the last couple of albums are still here. Maybe it's just the way that he's presenting it here. Lars is the overarching composer on here. He's the one that's leading the charge, and yeah, man, like, I get it. He's not only taking inspiration from the master keyboardists of the past, and there's so much keyboards found on this one. The synths, the keyboards, the pianos, like all the keys are in full array here. But I feel like he's also taking inspiration and really channeling some of the masters of the craft from the past within Emerson, Lake and Palmer, within Genesis, within King Crimson, within Yes, and without it being just a carbon copy. It feels like he took the notes of those masters of the past, and instead of just rearranging those notes, created something new and kind of moved forward with the music. And that's what I'm excited about. Yes, the music sounds incredible. Yes, the music does what this kind of eclectic prog needs to do. But more importantly than all of that, it moves the needle forward. And that is what I love about progressive rock. And that's why I come to this band, because I'm always hoping, and I know that it's there, they're able to innovate. They're not just there to rehash things that people love in the past. They're not there to just, pay homage to Rick Wakeman, Tony Banks, or Keith Emerson. They're actually there to innovate. They're there to invent. They're there to actually move things forward. And that's what I want. And I'm happy to say that's here on this record. So yeah. This is the first time, I think, since I've heard Hybris from Engelgard that I've been truly truly excited about the music that I'm hearing within this style of eclectic retro progressive rock music. You know, because all those other albums, from All Traps on Earth, from Wobbler, from all those, you know, circling bands of that style, this is the first one that actually changed the homework enough so I couldn't see the answers of that other student on here. And damn, Lars is doing such an amazing job on the keyboards. And even on those albums that I didn't necessarily connect with, I could still appreciate and I can still call out his talent and his vision. And I'm not just there begging for him to do something new. I'm here applauding him for doing something new. And this is right off the first track of Dremring, and I believe each track is kind of a vignette of a different, very famous painting. And I kind of like that structuring process, and maybe that's what's doing it for me, because of that structure that's found on this record. You know, we're going from vignette to vignette to vignette, and even though we don't have like the big 20-minute epic that a lot of Lars's orchestrations tend to have, we still have those, you know, fairly longer suites of music into the 10 and 12-minute marks. But I think because he's limiting himself a couple of times, like there's a 5-minute track, the album ends on a 3-minute track, you know, it allows him to be more succinct. It allows him to be more punchy in that case. And see that right off of that first track, as I mentioned, of Dremring, that shows him being that succinct composer that I know he can be. We're channeling bands like Griffin, where there's a lot more flutes, a lot more recorder found on here. You know, it's not just the keyboards 100% of the time. And I really appreciate that. You know, it's showing the eclectic side of this eclectic prog landscape. I love how driven it is. I love the flow of this. This is found on the second track as well. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it's 10 minutes. So it shows that, you know, Lars is able to construct these really succinct single tracks and these larger tracks as well. And he's able to handle those build-ups, those payoffs, those ebbs and flows. And he's able to handle it in a way that's very satisfying. You know, I'm not just sitting there waiting for the big crescendo. I'm not just sitting there waiting for the next big turn of events within these tracks. I'm enjoying the ride from start to finish. And man, is he able to write a catchy hook. I mean, this is found on the title track, the third track. Within this kind of eclectic prog, it's harder to write those moments that will stick with you. You know, there's so much going on. There's so many things that are being tried and being thrown at the wall that it could be hard to hold on to. And within the title track of Gamle, Mester, I believe, they're able to really throw things at the wall that stick. You know, like I can still hum along and sing along to some of these extremely memorable moments. And the other thing I want to bring the attention to is Lars's ability to know when to use what kind of sound. You know, look at the fourth track of, I want to say it's Medusa's Flout. Sure, the fourth track there. We have those Emerson, Lake and Palmer feels within the synths there, but that's like one aspect of it, and that's one style of it. And we're able to also go straight into like a more heavy-handed sound when it needs to be. There's a little bit more of the organ sound on there, very similar to like King Crimson. But then when we get more to the airy sound, that's where we're channeling more of the Rick Wakeman sound. So he's a master of knowing when to put what sound to what side of things. You know, when it needs to be a little bit darker, we've got the organs. When it needs to be a little bit more brighter, we've got the synths. When it needs to be more just vibes, that's where we have more of like the traditional keyboard sounds. And so I love the fact that Lars is able and commanding of when to use what sound to apply to what movement within the keyboards, you know, and so much of that is reflected on the music that's actually found on this track. Yeah, so let's talk about that 12th track, the longest one, the 5th track. Man, what a banger. I love the celebration of sound. You know, he's bringing in some symphonic aspects, you know, some channeling of yes within there. And I love how bright, how colorful everything sounds on this track. And it's just, it's got that celebration. You know, it almost feels like the summer album, even though it was released, in May? So like right at the beginning of summer, we've got this summer sounding flavor of music that I can't help but love. And, you know, the ebbs and flows within this track, the real payoffs that are found on here. Not only do I love the climb, but I love just sitting atop that hill and surveying all that came before. You know, and then this is all brought down with the shortest track, the final track off this album, which almost has like an Anthony Phillips feel to it. You know, it's got that Renaissance kind of flavor to it, which I really, really appreciate. It ends on a little bit more of a somber note. It allows us to take a breath as the curtains are closing on this, and it does exactly what a closing track needs to do, which is immediately makes me want to go right back to the beginning of this album and hit play right at the beginning. So yeah, what a triumph from Lars. What an absolute triumph. This is an album that has wooed me. You know, this is an album from a group, from a band that I've always been kind of lukewarm about, and you would think that this is the kind of music that was made specifically for me that I never really connected with. But man, there's something about this record, there's something about this artist and this sound that I find so infectious and so beautiful and moving that I couldn't help but love it. So I think my final overall conclusion of this will be Gamle Mester by Lars Fredrik Frøislie is an album I absolutely love with my whole heart. Man, we have had a lot of amazing banger albums from the prog rock sphere. You know, like I have just been living my best life within these progressive rock movements. You know, like where last year I felt like prog didn't necessarily have the hand on the button. They didn't necessarily have the finger on the pulse. This year they're just putting out banger after banger after banger after banger. And it's going to be really fun to try to figure out where all these albums land at the year-end review because, man, the amount of just talent this year is absolutely astounding. Absolutely astounding. So yeah, this is a Run Don't Walk. This one definitely gets the note seal of approval. This is Lars at the peak of his game. You know, this one is his best work by far. So yeah, if you haven't already listened to this one, I implore you to go and listen to this one. I have nothing but praise about this album. You know, I think Lars has finally written his magnum opus with this one. So yeah, absolutely love it. Go and check it out. Gets 2 big old thumbs up. And that's what I've got for Gamle Mester. I believe I finally correctly pronounced that. By Lars Fredrik Frøislie. What did you guys think about this record? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I think that's where I'm going to leave you guys for today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.